Hi, Dr. Alex here, and welcome to what I hope will be an enjoyable series to many people, although it may be of niche interest. Specifically, this series is transcribing the audiobooks of Douglas Adams' The Hitch-hiker's Guide to the Galaxy, The Restaurant at the End of the Universe, Life, the Universe and Everything, and So Long and Thanks for All the Fish, as read by Stephen Moore. Stephen Moore, for those who don't know, is the actor who played Marvin the Paranoid Android on the original radio production of The Hitch-hiker's Guide to the Galaxy and the TV series which followed soon after. This is the genuine Marvin the Paranoid Android, except no substitutes. When the radio series first aired in 1979, I was about 5 years old, and it was then repeated multiple times over several years on Radio 4, where it was first broadcast. My father was an avid fan of Hitchhikers as soon as it was produced, had the books, which I still have copies of, and listened to the radio series repeatedly, as did I growing up, to the point where I think I overtook my father in terms of my fandom for the series and would insist that we listen to it whenever it was on a Saturday, usually around about lunchtime, and it just had to be on in the background so I could listen to it. Later, in school, having consumed the radio series multiple times and the books, I discovered the audiobooks in the school library, as read by Stephen Moore. And of course, I got these out and listened to them repeatedly as long as I could. Obviously, I had to take them back. They were, after all, library books on tape. Recently, I got to thinking about these books on tape and how enjoyable they were. Being read by Stephen Moore, it had the voice of Marvin the Paranoid Android whenever he read the Marvin lines, and of course, the correct voice for the other characters that he also read in the radio series. And simply as the narrator, he has an excellent reading voice. So I remembered how much I enjoyed those as a child and then thought, I wonder if they're still readily available. As it turns out, they are not. They have never been produced on DVD or online. They only exist in that original tape form, and those tapes themselves are incredibly hard to find, as I discovered as I attempted to dig them out online from various shops and sources. I have now got all but one of the books, and hopefully by the time I get to the last book that Stephen Moore read, I should have all the tapes available. I would like to stress, I do not own the copyright for these tapes. I do not own the copyright for the original material, and I'm recording them in these videos in an effort to preserve them, because they are on magnetic tape. Magnetic tape degrades, and there aren't very many of them left around as far as I can see, and there's been no effort to reproduce these professionally in another format, either online, digitally, or even just on CD. So if you do own the copyright for these, please, by all means, copyright claim these videos, as the material is your own, but I would request humbly that you do not block them, just monetize them. My channel isn't monetized, so I'm not going to make money from this anyway, but I would like people, future generations, to be able to access these amazing recordings and enjoy Stephen Moore's work long into the future. Anyway, enough about my motivations for doing this, and now, here is Life, the Universe and Everything, Cassette Side 3.
Arthur materialized. He looked around for the others. They weren't there. If this was a party, it was a very bad one. Obviously, this wasn't a party. It was a cave, or a labyrinth, or a tunnel of something. There was insufficient light to tell. All was darkness, a damp, shiny darkness. The only sounds were the echoes of his own breathing, which sounded worried. Someone or something, however, seemed to be expecting him, for at that moment there lit up suddenly in the dark distance an eerie green neon sign. It said silently, "You have been diverted. Arthur Dent." He reeled. The sign flicked off, and left him blinking in the darkness with just the dim red image of his name jumping on his retina. "Welcome," the sign now suddenly said. "I don't think." Arthur peered huntedly into the darkness. Hello?" Beads of sweat formed on his brow, tensed themselves and leapt off. The sign changed itself again. It said, "Do not be alarmed. Be very, very frightened, Arthur Dent." Once again it flicked off. "Hello? Is anyone there?" There was no reply. Nothing. Just blackness. This really unnerved him, and he started to back away from that, back the way he had come. He was now backing towards whatever it was he had been backing away from in the first place. This, he couldn't help thinking, must be a foolish thing to do. He decided he would be better off backing the way he had first been backing and turned round again. It turned out at this point that his second impulse had been the correct one, because there was an indescribably hideous monster standing quietly behind him.
Bet you weren't expecting to see me again?
Arthur couldn't help thinking that was a strange remark for it to make, seeing as he had never met the creature before. Arthur blinked at it. It stood very still. It did look a little familiar. A terrible cold calm came over him as he realized that what he was looking at was a 6-foot-high hologram of a housefly.
Or perhaps you remember me better as the rabbit.
With a sudden ping, there was a rabbit there in the black labyrinth with him, a huge, monstrously, hideously soft and lovable rabbit.
One morning I poked my head for the first time into the bright new world and got it split open by what felt suspiciously like some primitive instrument made of flint. Made by you, Arthur Dent, and wielded by you. Rather hard, as I recall. You turned my skin into a bag for keeping interesting stones in. I happen to know that because in my next life I came back as a fly again, and you swatted me. Again. Only this time you swatted me with a bag you'd made of my previous skin. Arthur Dent. You are not merely a cruel and heartless man. You are also staggeringly tactless.
The voice paused, whilst Arthur gawped.
I see you have lost the bag. Probably got bored with it, did you?
Arthur shook his head helplessly. He wanted to explain that he had been, in fact, very fond of the bag, and had looked after it very well, and had taken it with him wherever he went, but that, somehow, every time he travelled anywhere, he seemed inexplicably to end up with the wrong bag, and that, curiously enough, even as they stood there, he was just noticing for the first time that the bag he had with him at that moment appeared to be made out of rather nasty fake leopard skin, and wasn't the one he'd had a few moments ago before he arrived in this whatever place it was. All he actually managed to say was,
Every life I ever lived, I got killed by Arthur Dent. Hard not to notice. Bit of a memory jogger. Bit of a pointer. Bit of a bloody giveaway.
The echoes of his voice roared up and down the corridors. Arthur stood silent and cold, his head shaking with disbelief.
Here's the moment, Dent. Here's the moment when at last I knew.
It was indescribably hideous, the thing that suddenly opened up in front of Arthur, making him gasp and gargle with horror. Arthur Dent suddenly realized that he was looking at his own mouth, when his attention was meant to be directed at the live oyster that was being tipped helplessly into it. He staggered back with a cry and averted his eyes.
Tell me it was a coincidence, Dent. I dare you to tell me it was a coincidence.
It was a coincidence, said Arthur quickly.
It was not. If it was a coincidence, then my name is not Agrajag.
And presumably, said Arthur, you would claim that that was your name.
Yes.
Well, I'm afraid it was still a coincidence, said Arthur.
Come in here and say that.
Arthur walked in. His tongue rather lost its footing, because the lights came up and revealed what it was he had walked into. It was a cathedral of hate. It was huge. It was horrific. It had a statue in it. Around the monumental walls were vast engraved stone tablets in memory of those who had fallen to Arthur Dent. And what was most disturbing about all this, apart from the statue, was the very clear implication that all these people and creatures were indeed the same person over and over again. And it was equally clear that this person was, however unfairly, extremely upset and annoyed. And this annoyance had been given its fullest expression in the statue in the centre of all this monstrosity, which was a statue of Arthur Dent, and an unflattering one. 50 feet tall if it was an inch, there was not an inch of it which wasn't crammed with insult to its subject matter. Arthur appeared as a Gorgon, an evil, rapacious, ravening, bloodied ogre slaughtering his way through an innocent one-man universe. Arthur put his hands over his eyes, hung his head, and shook it slowly from side to side in sadness and horror at the craziness of things. And when he opened his eyes again, there, in front of him, stood the figure of the man, or creature, or whatever it was, that he had supposedly been persecuting all this time. Agrajag was black, bloated, wrinkled, and leathery. He had the most astounding collection of teeth. Each of his 3 eyes was small and intense, and looked about as sane as a fish in a privet bush.
I was at a cricket match. Not in this body. This is my last body, my last life. This is my revenge body, my kill Arthur Dent body, my last chance. I had to fight to get it too. I was at a cricket match. I had a weak heart condition. But what, I said to my wife, can happen to me at a cricket match? As I'm watching, what happens? 2 people, quite maliciously, appear out of thin air just in front of me. The last thing I can't help but notice before my poor heart gives up in shock is that one of them is Arthur Dent, wearing a rabbit bone in his beard. Coincidence?
Yes, said Arthur.
Coincidence?
Arthur backed away nervously. He tugged at his beard. He was appalled to discover that in fact he still had the rabbit bone in it. He pulled it out and threw it away. "Look," he said, "it's just fate playing silly buggers with you, with me, with us. It's a complete coincidence."
What have you got against me, Dent?
"Nothing," insisted Arthur. "Honestly, nothing."
Well, seems a strange way to relate to somebody you got nothing against. Killing them all the time? Very curious piece of social interaction, I would call that. I'd also call it a lie.
"But look," said Arthur, "I'm very sorry. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. I've got to go. Have you got a clock? I'm meant to be helping save the universe."
Save the universe? You should have thought of that before you started your vendetta against me. What about the time you were on Stavromulabita and someone
"I've never been there," said Arthur.
tried to assassinate you and you ducked? Who do you think the bullet hit? What did you say?
"Never been there," repeated Arthur. What are you talking about? I have to go."
You must have been there. You were responsible for my death there as everywhere else. An innocent bystander.
"I've never heard of the place," insisted Arthur. "I've certainly never had anyone try to assassinate me, other than you. Perhaps I go there later, do you think?"
Oh, Zark. I've brought you here too soon. I've brought you here too zarking soon. I'm gonna kill you anyway. Let's see you get out of this one, Dent.
He rushed in a painful waddling hobble to what appeared to be a small black sacrificial altar. Arthur leapt down from his vantage place on the carving of his own foot and leapt upon him, and brought the strange monstrosity crashing down on top of the altar.
You know what you've done? You've only gone and killed me again. I mean, what do you want from me? Blood?
He thrashed again in a brief apoplectic fit, quivered and collapsed, smacking a large red button on the altar as he did so. Arthur started with horror and fear, first at what he appeared to have done, and then at the loud sirens and bells that suddenly shattered the air to announce some clamouring emergency. He stared wildly around him. The only exit appeared to be the way he came in. He pelted towards it, throwing away the nasty fake leopard skin bag as he did so. He dashed randomly, haphazardly through the labyrinthine maze. He seemed to be pursued more and more fiercely by klaxons, sirens, flashing lights. Suddenly he turned a corner, and there was a light in front of him. It wasn't flashing, it was daylight. As Arthur ran, darting, dashing and panting down the side of the mountain, he suddenly felt the whole bulk of the mountain move very, very slightly beneath him. There was a rumble, a roar, and a slight blurred movement, and a lick of heat in the distance behind and above him. The avalanche began. He ran with the fear of death in him, under him, over him, and grabbing hold of his hair. And suddenly he tripped again and was hurled forward by his considerable momentum. But just at the moment that he was about to hit the ground, astoundingly hard, he saw lying directly in front of him a small navy blue hold-all that he knew for a fact he had lost in the baggage retrieval system at Athens airport some 10 years in his personal timescale previously. And in his astonishment he missed the ground completely and bobbed off into the air with his brain singing. What he was doing was flying. What was he going to do about it? He looked back down at the ground. He didn't look at it hard, but did his best just to give it an idle glance, as it were, in passing. There were a couple of things he couldn't help noticing. One was that the eruption of the mountain seemed now to have spent itself. The other was his hold-all, the one he had lost at Athens airport. He was faced with the fact that he was going to have to pick the thing up. Furthermore, he realized the bag, if it was still in the state in which he lost it, would contain a can which would have in it the only Greek olive oil still surviving in the universe. Slowly, carefully, inch by inch, he began to bob downwards, swinging gently from side to side like a nervous sheet of paper feeling its way towards the ground. It went well. He was feeling good. He bobbed. He floated. He tried a little swoop. The swoop was terrific. The air threw itself past him. He thrilled through it. Halfway down there was a sudden dangerous moment when he could no longer believe he was doing this, and therefore he very nearly wasn't. But he recovered himself in time, skimmed over the ground, slipped an arm smoothly through the handles of the bag, and began to climb back up. Couldn't make it, and all of a sudden collapsed, bruised, scratched, and shaking on the stony ground. He staggered instantly to his feet and swayed hopelessly around, swinging the bag around him in an agony of grief and disappointment. At that moment he remembered that in the bag he was now carrying was not only a can of Greek olive oil, but a duty-free allowance of Retsina. And in the pleasurable shock of that realization he failed to notice for at least 10 seconds that he was now flying again. He whooped and cried with relief and pleasure, and sheer physical delight. Cheekily he sat on an updraft and went through the contents of the hold-all. He laughed with pleasure at the discovery that the bag did in fact contain the olive oil and the Retsina, as well as a pair of cracked sunglasses, some sand-filled swimming trunks, some creased postcards of Santorini, a large and unsightly towel, some interesting stones, and various scraps of paper with the addresses of people he was relieved to think he would never meet again, even if the reason why was a sad one. He dropped the stones, put on the sunglasses, and let the pieces of paper whip away in the wind. 10 minutes later, drifting idly through a cloud, he got a large and extremely disreputable cocktail party in the small of the back. Arthur lay floundering in pain on a piece of ripped and dismembered reinforced concrete, flicked at by wisps of passing cloud and confused by the sounds of flabby merrymaking somewhere indistinctly behind him. He lay panting heavily in the wet air. He couldn't understand what a building would be doing flying through the clouds. He looked up from where he was lying. A wall of pale but stained stone slabs rose up behind him, the building proper. He seemed to be stretched out on some sort of ledge or lip which extended outwards for about 3 or 4 feet all the way around. Clutching his hold-all, he edged along the wall, hoping to find a doorway in. The solid weight of the can of olive oil, the Retsina, and the postcards of Santorini was a great reassurance to him. Finally, he came to the corner, and as his hand rounded the corner, it encountered something which gave him such a shock that he nearly fell straight off. It was another hand. He found his eyes peering into those of Ford Prefect. Beyond him stood Slarty-Bartfast, and beyond them he could clearly see a porchway and a large closed door. "Where the zarking photon have you been?" hissed Ford, panic-stricken. Well," stuttered Arthur, "here and there. What are you doing here?" Ford turned his wild eyes on Arthur again. "They won't let us in without a bottle," he hissed. The first thing Arthur noticed as they entered into the thick of the party, apart from the noise, the suffocating heat, the wild profusion of colours that protruded dimly through the atmosphere of heady smoke, the carpets thick with ground glass, ash and avocado droppings, and the small group of pterodactyl-like creatures in Durex who descended on his cherished bottle of Retsina, squawking, "A new pleasure, a new pleasure!" was Trillian, being chatted up by a thunder god.
Didn't I see you at Milliways?
"Were you the one with the hammer?"
Yes, I much prefer it here. So much less reputable, so much more fraught.
"Seems fun," said Trillian. "What did you say, Arthur?" "I said, how the hell did you get here?" "I was a row of dots flowing randomly through the universe. Have you met Thor? He makes thunder." "Hello," said Arthur. "I expect that must be very interesting."
Hi, it is. Have you got a drink?
No, actually."
Then why don't you go and get one?
"See you later, Arthur," said Trillian. Something jogged Arthur's mind, and he looked round huntedly. "Zaphod isn't here, is he?" said. "See you," said Trillian firmly, "later." Thor glared at him with hard, coal black eyes. His beard bristled. What little light there was in the place mustered its forces briefly to glint menacingly off the horns on his helmet. He took Trillian's elbow in his extremely large hand, and the muscles in his upper arm moved around each other like a couple of Volkswagens parking. He led her away. "Come on, Earthman," said Slarty-Bartfast. "Arthur, we must find the silver bale. It is here somewhere. Think of the danger to the universe." "The universe," said Arthur, "is big enough and old enough to look after itself for half an hour." "All right. I'll wander round and see if anybody's seen it." "Have you seen a bale anywhere?" said Arthur to a little man who seemed to be standing eagerly waiting to listen to somebody. "It's made of silver, vitally important for the future safety of the universe, and about this long." "No," effervesced the little man. "What an exciting life you must lead. Thank you very much." He shook Arthur warmly by the hand and walked off into the crowd. Arthur shook his head in astonishment. A youngish-looking man came up to him, an aggressive-looking type with a hook mouth, a lantern nose, and small, beady little cheekbones. He was wearing black trousers, a black silk shirt open to what was presumably his navel. "Hey, did I hear you say your name just now?" he said. "Yes, it's Arthur Dent. Only there was a man in a mountain wanted to see you." "I met him." "Yeah, only he seemed pretty anxious about it, you know." "Yes, I met him." "Okay, all right, I'm just telling you, right? Good night, good luck, win awards, whatever. Do what you do it well." "Why?" said Arthur. "Do it badly," said the man. "Who cares? Who gives a shit? Go away, get off my back, will you, guy? Just zark off." "Okay, I'm going," said Arthur hurriedly. "It's been real." The man gave a sharp wave and disappeared off into the throng. "What was that about?" said Arthur to a girl he found standing beside him. "Why did he tell me to win awards?" "Just showbiz talk," shrugged the girl. "He's just won an award at the annual Ursa Minor Alpha Recreational Illusions Institute awards ceremony and was hoping to be able to pass it off lightly, only you didn't mention it, so he couldn't." "Oh," said Arthur. "Oh, well, I'm sorry I didn't. What was it for?" "The most gratuitous use of the word fuck in a serious screenplay. It's very prestigious." "I see," said Arthur. "Yes, and what do you get for that?" "A Rory. It's just a small silver thing set on a large black base." "What did you say?" I didn't say anything. I was just about to ask what this silver—" "Oh, I thought you said—"
Whop!
"Said what?"
Whop!
The party was locked in a horrible embrace with a strange white spaceship which seemed to be half sticking through it. Together they were lurching, heaving and spinning their way around the sky in grotesque disregard of their own weight. The clouds parted, the air roared and leapt out of their way, and suddenly, with a foop, the cricket ship was gone. They had removed the award for the most gratuitous use of the word fuck in a serious screenplay, and in its place had left a scene of devastation that left Arthur feeling almost as sick as a runner-up for a Rory. "We would love to stay and help," shouted Ford, "only we're not going to. We've got to go and save the universe, you see." "Trillian!" shouted Arthur. "Earth, man, we must go!" "Trillian!" shouted Arthur again. A moment or two later, Trillian staggered shaking into view, supported by her new friend, the Thunder God.
"The girl stays with me. There's a great party going on in Valhalla. We'll be flying off."
"Where were you when all this was going on?" said Arthur.
"Upstairs. I was weighing her. Flying's a tricky business, you see. You have to calculate wind."
"She comes with us," said Arthur. "Hey," said Trillian, "don't I—" "No," said Arthur, "you come with us."
"She comes with me."
"Come on, Earthman," said Slarty Bartfast, nervously picking at Arthur's sleeve. "Come on, Slarty Bartfast," said Ford, nervously picking at the old man's sleeve. Slarty Bartfast had the teleport device. The party lurched and swayed, sending everyone reeling, except for Thor, and except for Arthur, who stared shaking into the Thunder God's black eyes. Slowly, incredibly, Arthur put up what now appeared to be his tiny little fists. "Want to make something of it?"
"I beg your minuscule pardon?"
"I said," repeated Arthur, "do you want to make something of it?" He waggled his fists ridiculously.
"Do I want to make something of it?"
"Yes," said Arthur. "Do you want to step outside?"
"All right,"
bellowed Thor like an enraged bull, or in fact like an enraged thunder god, which is a great deal more impressive, and did so. "Good," said Arthur. "That's got rid of him. Slarty, get us out of here." "All right," shouted Ford at Arthur. "So I'm a coward. The point is I'm still alive." They were back aboard the starship Bistromath. So was Slarty Bartfast. So was Trillian. Harmony and Concord were not. Slarty Bartfast was sitting in his pilot couch on the flight deck. "We fared rather pathetically at the party, I'm afraid, and our only hope now is to try to prevent the robots from using the key in the lock. How in heaven we do that, I don't know. Just have to go there, I suppose. Can't say I like the idea at all. Probably end up dead." "Where is Trillian, anyway?" said Arthur. "And where are my potato crisps?" said Ford. "They are both in the room of informational illusions. I think that your young lady friend is trying to understand some problems of galactic history. I think the potato crisps are probably helping her." It is a mistake to think you can solve any major problems just with potatoes. For instance, there was once an insanely aggressive race of people called the Silastic Armor Fiends of Striterax. Luckily, they lived even further back in galactic history than anything we've so far encountered, 20 billion years ago, when the galaxy was young and fresh, and every idea worth fighting for was a new one. And fighting was what the Silastic Armor Fiends of Striterax were good at. And being good at it, they did it a lot. They fought their enemies, i.e. everybody else. They fought each other. Their planet was a complete wreck. The best way of dealing with a Silastic Armor Fiend was to put him in a room on his own, because sooner or later he would simply beat himself up. Another achievement of the Silastic Armor Fiends of Striterax is that they were the first race who ever managed to shock a computer. It was a gigantic spaceborne computer called Hector, which to this day is remembered as one of the most powerful ever built. It was the first to be built like a natural brain, in that every cellular particle of it carried the pattern of the whole within it, which enabled it to think more flexibly and imaginatively, and also, it seemed, to be shocked. The Silastic Armor Fiends of Striterax were engaged in one of their regular wars with the strenuous Gar fighters of Stug, and were not enjoying it as much as usual because it involved an awful lot of trekking through the radiation swamps of Quilzenda and across the fire mountains of Frasfraga, neither of which terrains they felt at home in. So, when the strangulous stiletons of Jajazikstadt joined in the fray and forced them to fight another front in the Gamma Caves of Carfrax and the ice storms of Varlenguten, they decided that enough was enough, and they ordered Hector to design for them an ultimate weapon. "What do you mean," asked Hector, "by ultimate?" To which the Silastic armor fiends of Stritarak said, "Read a bloody dictionary," and plunged back into the fray. So Hector designed an ultimate weapon. It was a very, very small bomb, which was simply a junction box in hyperspace that would, when activated, connect the heart of every major sun with the heart of every other major sun simultaneously, and thus turn the entire universe into one gigantic hyperspatial supernova. When the Silastic armor fiends tried to use it to blow up a strangular stiletton munitions dump in one of the Gamma Caves, they were extremely irritated that it didn't work, and said so. Hector had been shocked by the whole idea. He tried to explain that he had been thinking about this ultimate weapon business and had worked out that there was no conceivable consequence of not setting the bomb off that was worse than the known consequence of setting it off, and he had therefore taken the liberty of introducing a small flaw into the design of the bomb, and he hoped that everyone involved would, on sober reflection, feel that the Silastic armor fiends disagreed and pulverized the computer. Later they thought better of it and destroyed the faulty bomb as well. Then, pausing only to smash the hell out of the strenuous Garfighters of Stug and the strangular stiletons of Jajazikstadt, they went on to find an entirely new way of blowing themselves up, which was a profound relief to everyone else in the galaxy, particularly the Garfighters, the Stiletons, and the Potatoes. Trillian had watched all this as well as the story of cricket. She emerged from the room of informational illusions thoughtfully, just in time to discover that they had arrived too late. Even as the starship Bistromath flickered into objective being on the top of a small cliff on the mile-wide asteroid which pursued a lonely and eternal path in orbit around the enclosed star system of Cricket, its crew was aware that they were in time only to be witnesses to an unstoppable historic event. They didn't realize that they were going to see two. They stood cold, lonely and helpless on the cliff edge and watched the activity below. Lances of light wheeled in sinister arcs against the void from a point only about 100 yards below and in front of them. They stared into the blinding event. The white Cricket warship was parked amongst the stark grey crags of the asteroid, alternately flaring under arc lights or disappearing in shadow. The 11 white robots were bearing in procession the Wicket Key, out into the middle of a circle of swinging lights. The Wicket Key was rebuilt. Its components shone and glittered. The steel pillar, or Marvin's leg, of strength and power. The gold bale, or heart of the infinite improbability drive, of prosperity. The perspex pillar, or Argabuthan's sceptre of justice, of science and reason. The silver bale, or Rory Award for the most gratuitous use of the word fuck in a serious screenplay, and the now reconstituted wooden pillar, or ashes of a burnt stump signifying the death of English cricket, of nature and spirituality. "I suppose there is nothing we can do at this point?" asked Arthur nervously. "No," sighed Slotty Bartfast. Ford said nothing. Trillian said nothing, but in a peculiarly thoughtful and distinct way. She was staring at that blankness of the space beyond the asteroid. The asteroid circled the dust cloud which surrounded the slow-time envelope which enclosed the world on which lived the people of cricket, the masters of cricket, and their killer robots. In the center of the area of light which the robots were approaching, a square-shaped crack appeared in the ground, and soon it became clear that a block of the ground about 6 feet square was slowly rising. At the same time they became aware of some other movement. The asteroid was moving. It was moving slowly in towards the dust cloud, as if being hauled in inexorably by some celestial angler in its depths. They were to make in real life the journey through the cloud which they had already made in the room of informational illusions. They stood frozen in silence. Trillian frowned. An age seemed to pass. Events seemed to pass with spinning slowness, as the leading edge of the asteroid passed into the vague and soft outer perimeter of the cloud. And soon they were engulfed in a thin and dancing obscurity. They passed on through it, on and on, dimly aware of vague shapes and worlds indistinguishable in the darkness except in the corner of the eye. Trillian again regarded the passage from within her own frowning thoughts. And they were through it, and confronted with a fresh blankness, as if space were pinched out of existence in front of them. And now things moved quickly. A blinding shaft of light seemed almost to explode from out of the block which had risen 3 feet out of the ground, and out of that rose a smaller perspex block, dazzling with interior dancing colours. The block was slotted with deep grooves, 3 upright and 2 across, clearly designed to accept the wicket key. The robot approached the lock, slotted the key into its home, and stepped back again. The block twisted round of its own accord, and space began to alter. As space unpinched itself, it seemed agonizingly to twist the eyes of the watchers in their sockets. They found themselves staring, blinded, at an unravelled sun which stood now before them where, it had seemed only seconds before, there had not been even empty space. They staggered back and heard ringing in their ears the thin and unexpected chant of the robots, crying out in unison, "Cricket! Cricket! Cricket! Cricket!" The sound chilled them. It was harsh, it was cold, it was empty, it was mechanically dismal. It was also triumphant. They were so stunned by these 2 sensory shocks that they almost missed the second historic event. Zaphod Beeblebrox, the only man in history to survive a direct blast attack from the cricket robots, ran out of the cricket warship brandishing a zap gun. "Okay," he cried. "The situation is totally under control as of this moment in time." The single robot guarding the hatchway to the ship silently swung his battle club and connected it with the back of Zaphod's left head. "Who the Zark did that?" said the left head, and lolled sickeningly forward. His right head gazed keenly into the middle distance. "Who did what?" it said. The club connected with the back of his right head. Zaphod measured his length as a rather strange shape on the ground. Within a matter of seconds the whole event was over. A few blasts from the robots were sufficient to destroy the lock forever. It split and melted and splayed its contents brokenly. The robots marched grimly, and it almost seemed in a slightly disheartened manner, back into their warship, with a "foop," and was gone. Trillian and Ford ran hectically round and down the steep incline to the dark, still body of Zaphod Beeblebrox. "I don't know," said Zaphod for what seemed to him like the 37th time. "They could have killed me, but they didn't. Maybe they just thought I was a kind of wonderful guy or something. I could understand that." The others silently registered their opinions of this theory. Zaphod lay on the cold floor of the flight deck. His back seemed to wrestle the floor as pain thudded through him and banged at his heads. "I think that there is something wrong with those anodized dudes, something fundamentally weird. They are programmed to kill everybody. That could be it. Hey, baby," he said to Trillian, hoping this would make up for his previous behavior. "You all right?" she said gently. "Yeah," he said, "I'm fine." "Good," she said, and walked away to think. She stared at the huge visi-screen over the flight couches and, twisting a switch, flipped local images over it. One image was the blankness of the dust cloud. One was the sun of cricket. One was cricket itself. She flipped between them fiercely. "Well, that's goodbye galaxy then," said Arthur, slapping his knees and standing up. "No, our course is clear. We must go down to cricket. Unless we determine to take action, then we shall all be destroyed. We shall all die. Surely we care about that." "Not enough to want to get killed over it," said Ford. Slarty Bartfast clearly found this point of view extremely seductive, and he fought against it. He turned again to Zaphod, who was gritting his teeth and sweating with the pain. "You surely must have some idea of why they spared your life. It seems most strange and unusual." "I kind of think they didn't even know," shrugged Zaphod. I told you, they hit me with the most feeble blast. Knocked me out, right? They lugged me into their ship, dumped me in a corner, and ignored me. Like they were embarrassed about me being there. If I said anything, they knocked me out again. We had some great conversations. Hey, oh, hi there, oh, I wonder, oh. Kept me amused for hours, you know. He winced again. He was toying with something in his fingers. He held it up. It was the gold bale. The heart of gold. The heart of the infinite improbability drive. Only that and the wooden pillar had survived the destruction of the lock intact. I hear your ship can move a bit, he said. So how would you like to zip me back to mine before you— Will you not help us? I'd love to stay and help you save the galaxy, but I have the mother and father of a pair of headaches, and I feel a lot of little headaches coming on. Next time it needs saving, I'm your guy. Hey, Trillion baby. Yes? You want to come? Heart of gold, excitement and adventure and really wild things? I'm going down to Cricket, she said. It was the same hill, and yet not the same. This time it was not an informational illusion. This was Cricket itself, and they were standing on it. Possibly the most dangerous place in the galaxy for anyone who isn't a cricketer to stand. Arthur shuddered. Slarty-Bartfast shuddered. Ford, surprisingly, shuddered. It was not surprising that he shuddered, it was surprising that he was there at all. But when they had returned Zaphod to his ship, Ford had felt unexpectedly shamed into not running away. He hugged to himself one of the zap guns with which they had armed themselves out of Zaphod's armory. Trillion shuddered and frowned as she looked into the sky. This, too, was not the same. It was no longer blank and empty. High in the sky, where no cricketer ever looked, were the war zones, the robot zones, huge warships and tower blocks floating in the Nilograv fields, far above the idyllic pastoral lands of the surface of Cricket. Trillion stared at them and thought. I think I know, she said. Shh, said Slarty-Bartfast in alarm, and his thin, trembling hand motioned them further back beneath the shadow of the tree. Suddenly, as before, in the tape, there were lights coming along the hill path, but this time the dancing beams were not from lanterns but electric torches. This time there were no lilting, whimsical songs about flowers and farming and dead dogs, but hushed voices in urgent debate. Within seconds a second party became visible, approaching from the other side of the dark hill. They were moving swiftly and purposefully, their torches swinging and probing around them. The parties were clearly converging, and not merely with each other, they were converging deliberately on the spot where Arthur and the others were standing. Arthur heard the slight rustle as Ford Prefect raised his zap gun to his shoulder, and the slight whimpering cough as Slarty-Bartfast raised his. He felt the cold, unfamiliar weight of his own gun, and with shaking hands he raised it. Only Trillion didn't raise her gun. She raised her eyebrows, and bit her lip in thought. "Has it occurred to you?" she began, but nobody wanted to discuss anything much at the moment. A light stabbed through the darkness from behind them, and they spun around to find a third party of cricketers behind them, searching them out with their torches. Ford Prefect's gun crackled viciously, but fire spat back at it, and it crashed from his hands. They were surrounded by pale-faced cricketers and bathed in bobbing torchlight. "Hello," said one of the captors. "Excuse me, but are you aliens?" Meanwhile, more millions of miles away than the mind can comfortably encompass, Zaphod Beeblebrox was throwing a mood again. He had repaired his ship, that is, he'd watched with alert interest while a service robot had repaired it for him. It was now, once again, one of the most powerful and extraordinary ships in existence. He could go anywhere, do anything. He got up again and wandered over to a computer screen. He pushed a few buttons. Little blobs started to rush around the screen, eating each other. "Pow! Free you! Pop, pop, pop! Hi there! You have scored 3 points. Previous best score, 7,597,200. Okay, said Zaphod, and fed his score and the previous best one into the computer. His ship made a blur of the universe. "Tell us," said the thin, pale-faced cricketer who had stepped forward from the ranks of the others and stood uncertainly in the circle of torchlight, handling his gun as if he were just holding it for someone else who just popped off somewhere but would be back in a minute. "Do you know anything about something called the balance of nature? It's just something we heard about. Probably nothing important. Well, I suppose we'd better kill you then." He looked down at his gun as if he was trying to find which bit to press. "That is," he said, looking up again, "unless there's anything you want to chat about." Slow, numb astonishment crept up the bodies of Slarty Bartfast, Ford, and Arthur. "We're worried, you see," said another man from the crowd, "about this plan of universal destruction." "Yes," added another, "and the balance of nature. It just seemed to us that if the whole of the rest of the universe is destroyed, it will somehow upset the balance of nature. We're quite keen on ecology, you see." "And sport," said another loudly. This got a cheer of approval from the others. "Yes," agreed the first, "and sport." He looked back at his fellows uneasily and scratched fitfully at his cheek. He seemed to be wrestling with some deep inner confusion. "You see," he mumbled, "some of us are quite keen to have sporting links with the rest of the galaxy, and though I can see the argument about keeping sport out of politics, I think that if we want to have sporting links with the rest of the galaxy, which we do, then it's probably a mistake to destroy it, and indeed the rest of the universe, which is what seems to be the idea now." "OK," said Trillian, "let's talk about it." She walked forward and took the poor confused cricketer by the arm. Trillian led him for a short walk through the torchlight before she said anything more. She turned and faced him, and lightly held both his arms. He was a picture of bewildered misery. "Tell me," she said. He said nothing for a moment, whilst his gaze darted from one of her eyes to the other. "We have to be alone, I think. We have this bomb now, you see. It's just a little one." "I know," she said. "But they say it can destroy everything that exists. And we have to do that, you see, I think. Will that make us alone? I don't know. It seems to be our function, though." Trillian slowly put her arms round the poor, bewildered young cricketer and patted his trembling head on her shoulder. "It's all right," she said quietly, but clearly enough for all the shadowy crowd to hear. "You don't have to do it." She let him go and stood back. "I want you to do something for me," she said. "I want you to take me to your leader." And she pointed into the war zones in the sky. She seemed somehow to know that their leader would be there. Her laughter seemed to discharge something in the atmosphere. From somewhere at the back of the crowd a single voice started to sing a tune which would have enabled Paul McCartney, had he written it, to buy the world.